The coffee maker gurgled its final breath just as Marcus DeWitt realized the screaming outside wasn't coming from a car alarm. He'd been up since 5 that Tuesday morning, going through the motions like any other day: shower, shave, check his phone for the traffic report, but the world had different plans brewing outside his Denver apartment. The screaming got louder, closer, more desperate, and Marcus moved to his living room window with the kind of casual curiosity that belonged to a world that no longer existed. What he saw down on 15th Street made his stomach drop like a stone thrown down a well. Mrs. Patterson from 3B was sprinting down the sidewalk in her bathrobe, her gray hair wild around her face, and behind her came something that used to be human. The thing moved with jerky, broken movements, its jaw hanging at an angle that nature never intended, and it was gaining on her fast. Marcus pressed his face against the glass, his breath fogging up the window, watching as 3 more of those things emerged from the alley between the coffee shop and the dry cleaners. They moved like puppets with half their strings cut, but they moved with purpose, with hunger. Mrs. Patterson didn't make it to the corner. Marcus turned away before he saw the end, his hands shaking so bad he nearly dropped his phone when he finally thought to grab it. No signal. He tried again. Nothing. The TV remote was on the couch where he'd left it the night before, and he snatched it up, jamming his thumb against the power button. Static on Channel 7. Static on Channel 4. On Channel 9, he caught the tail end of an emergency broadcast, a woman with makeup running down her face, reading from something off-screen, her voice cracking with barely controlled panic. The words "shelter in place" and "avoid contact" and "not a drill" tumbled out before the feed cut to nothing but a high-pitched tone that made Marcus's teeth ache. He killed the power and stood there in his apartment, in his work clothes, holding a cup of coffee that was getting cold in his hand, trying to make his brain accept what his eyes had just witnessed. The building shuddered. Someone was pounding on a door somewhere below him, and a man's voice was shouting about letting him in. Please God, let him in. Then the voice cut off with a wet sound that Marcus felt in his bones. He moved without thinking, his body operating on some primal frequency his conscious mind hadn't caught up to yet. The deadbolt on his door, when had he last actually used it? His fingers fumbled with the mechanism, sliding it home with a click that sounded too small, too fragile. The chain lock too. He dragged his kitchen table across the floor, the legs screaming against the hardwood, and wedged it against the door. His neighbor's door burst open across the hall. Marcus heard it slam against the wall, heard footsteps, heard Tommy Rodriguez's voice yelling for his girlfriend Jess to move now. More footsteps on the stairs, heavy ones, stumbling ones, and then sounds that Marcus would spend the rest of his considerably shortened life trying to forget. He backed away from his door, nearly tripping over his own feet, and that's when his phone buzzed in his pocket. 1 bar of signal, flickering like a dying firefly. Text messages flooded in all at once, dozens of them, from his brother in Colorado Springs, his ex-girlfriend, his boss, his buddy Ray from the gym. They all said versions of the same thing: stay inside, don't trust the news, head for the mountains, stay away from the cities, it's everywhere, they're everywhere, God help us. The last message was from his brother Dylan, getting mom and heading to the cabin. You remember where. Don't wait around. These things don't stop. Marcus looked around his apartment, at the life he'd built with its flat-screen TV and craft beer in the fridge and the gym bag he'd never end up using. 29 years old, worked in IT, had a decent car in the parking garage downstairs, and exactly 0 survival skills unless you counted his ability to fix a router. Outside his window, Denver was eating itself alive. Smoke rose from somewhere downtown. A helicopter passed overhead, flying low and fast toward the mountains. Someone in the building was crying, the sound muffled but persistent. Marcus made a decision. He had maybe an hour before this whole place became a tomb. He needed supplies, needed weapons, needed to get to that parking garage and pray his Honda still started. Every breath from here on out was borrowed time, and the debt collectors were right outside his door, hungry and patient and absolutely relentless. Marcus dumped the contents of his hiking backpack onto the bedroom floor, his hands working on autopilot while his brain tried to process the new math of survival. The expensive camera gear he'd saved up for scattered across the carpet, useless now, just expensive paperweights in a world where nobody would ever browse Instagram again. He started grabbing what mattered, the camping knife his brother had given him last Christmas still in its packaging, 2 bottles of water from under his sink, a box of granola bars, the first aid kit from the bathroom cabinet that he'd never opened, and every piece of clothing he could stuff into the remaining space. His phone buzzed again. "Ray from the gym, they got into my building through the parking garage. Don't use the garage." Marcus stared at the message, then looked at his apartment door, then at his 4th-floor window that overlooked a street now filling with abandoned cars and lurching figures. The parking garage was his only play, and Ray's warning had just turned it into a death trap. Another crash echoed through the building, closer this time, maybe 2 floors down. Someone was screaming a name over and over, "Melissa, Melissa, please," and then the screaming changed pitch, became something that didn't sound like words anymore. Marcus zipped the backpack, testing its weight. 30 pounds, maybe 35. He moved to his kitchen, yanking open drawers with enough force to send silverware clattering. The biggest knife he owned was a 10-inch chef's knife he'd bought during a cooking phase that lasted about 3 weeks. He grabbed it, feeling stupid and terrified and completely out of his depth. What was he supposed to do with a kitchen knife against those things? He'd seen Mrs. Patterson try to fight back. It hadn't mattered. The apartment building had gone from normal to nightmare in less than 30 minutes, and Marcus knew the clock was still ticking. He pressed his ear against his door, listening past his own heartbeat hammering in his throat. Footsteps in the hallway, but they sounded wrong, dragging, uneven, accompanied by a wet breathing sound that made his skin crawl. The thing outside his door bumped against it, and Marcus jerked back like the wood had burned him. The doorknob rattled. Once. Twice. Then the footsteps dragged away, and Marcus realized he'd been holding his breath long enough to see stars at the edges of his vision. He couldn't stay here. The building was compromised, and it was only a matter of time before these things figured out how doors worked or found a window someone forgot to lock. The cabin in the mountains was a 6-hour drive on a good day, Dylan's place up past Breckenridge where they used to go hunting, where their old man had taught them to shoot before the cancer took him. 6 hours might as well be 6,000 miles, but it was the only destination Marcus had. He moved to his window, looking down at the chaos below. A police car sat sideways across the intersection, its lights still spinning, doors hanging open, no cops in sight. A small group of people were making a run for it down the street, heading east toward the highway. One of them was carrying a baseball bat. Another had a crowded shopping cart. Marcus watched them disappear around a corner, and 30 seconds later, he heard gunshots, pop, 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 followed by more screaming. The parking garage entrance was on the north side of the building. To get there, Marcus would have to go down 4 flights of stairs, through the lobby where the mailboxes were and where old Mr. Chin usually sat reading his newspaper, and across maybe 50 feet of exposed ground. 50 feet that right now looked like 50 miles. He shrugged on the backpack, cinched the straps tight, and grabbed the chef's knife in his right hand. His left hand was shaking so bad he had to make a fist to steady it. Marcus took one last look at his apartment, at the couch where he'd watched the Broncos lose on Sunday, at the kitchen where he'd eaten cereal for dinner more times than he'd care to admit, at the life that had ended while he was checking traffic reports. Then he unlocked his door. The hallway was empty, but the walls told stories in streaks of red that Marcus's brain refused to fully process. Tommy Rodriguez's door hung open, the apartment dark inside. Something was moving in there, making small sounds like an animal rooting through garbage. Marcus didn't look. Couldn't look. He moved to the stairwell door, his sneakers silent on the carpet, and eased it open. The stairs descended into shadow. The emergency lights were supposed to kick on when the power failed, but apparently, the apocalypse didn't care much about building codes. Marcus could see down to the third-floor landing, could hear something below that, voices, maybe, or the echo of his own terror bouncing off concrete walls. He started down, keeping to the outside edge of the stairs where the steps were less likely to creak, the knife held out in front of him like it could cut through the darkness and the fear and the impossible situation he'd woken up to. At the third-floor landing, he found the source of the sound. A zombie, he couldn't think of any other word for it, stood facing the wall, its head tilted at an angle, arms hanging limp. It wore the remains of a postal worker's uniform, and Marcus recognized the build, recognized the wedding ring still on its finger. Jerry from 2F, who'd always held the elevator for people, who'd brought his dog to the building barbecues. Jerry's head swiveled toward Marcus with mechanical precision, its eyes clouded over with milky film, its mouth opening to release a sound between a moan and a rattle. Marcus ran. Marcus hit the second-floor landing doing maybe 15 miles an hour, his backpack slamming against his spine with each step, and Jerry, who wasn't Jerry anymore, came stumbling after him with that horrible jerking gait that was somehow faster than it had any right to be. The stairwell amplified everything, Marcus's gasping breaths, his sneakers slapping concrete, the wet dragging sound of the thing behind him that used to deliver mail and complain about the Rockies pitching. Marcus didn't think, didn't plan, just grabbed the railing and vaulted himself around the corner toward the first floor, his ankle twisting as he landed wrong but adrenaline keeping him upright and moving. The lobby door burst open ahead of him and 3 people came crashing through, a woman in yoga pants clutching a tire iron, a teenage kid with a skateboard, and a guy in a security uniform Marcus recognized from the office building next door. They saw Marcus, saw what was chasing him, and the woman screamed, "Stairs are blocked below, they're everywhere down there." Marcus's brain processed this information in the half-second it took him to reach the lobby door, and he made a calculation that would either save his life or end it. He grabbed the door frame, used his momentum to swing himself through, and immediately went left toward the maintenance corridor instead of right toward the main entrance. Behind him, he heard Jerry crash into the group, heard the tire iron connect with something solid, heard cursing and the meaty sound of impact. The maintenance corridor was a narrow hallway the building staff used to access the electrical rooms and the garbage compactor, and Marcus had only been down here once when his sink had backed up and the super had showed him where the main water shutoff was. The hallway was dark except for the emergency exit sign at the far end, glowing red like a promise or a lie. His shoulder hit the wall as he ran, the confined space making it impossible to move at full speed, and behind him, someone was screaming his name. Not Jerry. The woman with the tire iron. "The garage, get to the garage," she yelled, and then her voice cut off with a gurgling sound that Marcus knew meant she wasn't getting to any garage ever again. The exit door at the end of the corridor had a push bar, and Marcus hit it like a linebacker, bursting out into the pale morning light of the alley that ran along the building's north side. The parking garage entrance was right there, maybe 30 yards away, the gate hanging open because someone had smashed through it with their car, a blue sedan now wrapped around a concrete pillar just inside, its driver's door open, dried blood on the steering wheel. Marcus sprinted for it, his twisted ankle screaming protests that got buried under the louder screaming of his survival instinct. Movement to his left made him dodge right without looking, some primitive part of his brain keeping him alive while the thinking part was still catching up. Something grabbed at his backpack, fingers clutching at the fabric, and Marcus spun with the chef's knife, swinging wild. The blade connected with an arm, a shoulder, something that used to be human but now just wanted to eat him. The zombie, a woman in a nightgown, her throat torn open, her eyes dead and hungry, didn't even seem to notice the cut. She lunged again, and this time Marcus aimed for the head like every zombie movie he'd ever half-watched had taught him. The knife went in just above the ear, and the woman dropped like someone had cut her power cord. Marcus stood there for maybe 2 seconds, staring at the knife stuck in her skull, his hands empty, his only weapon gone. No time to retrieve it. The maintenance door banged open behind him and more of them were coming, at least 4, maybe 5, moving with that relentless stumbling purpose that didn't need rest or fear or anything except hunger. The parking garage swallowed him up, the shadows thick after the brightness of the alley, and Marcus's eyes struggled to adjust as he ran deeper into the structure. His Honda was on the second level, spot 2F, and he could see the ramp ahead, could see other cars sitting silent and abandoned, could see bodies on the ground that he refused to look at directly. A hand shot out from between two cars and grabbed his ankle. Marcus went down hard, his chin bouncing off concrete, stars exploding behind his eyes. The thing pulling itself toward him had no legs, just dragged its torso along the ground using its arms, its mouth snapping at air, at his shoes, at anything it could reach. Marcus kicked, connecting with its face, its chest, kicking until something crunched and it stopped moving. He scrambled to his feet, tasting blood where he'd bitten his tongue, and kept running. The second level was chaos frozen in time. Someone had tried to make a run for it in a pickup truck and crashed into at least 3 other vehicles. A family's minivan sat with all its doors open, children's toys scattered on the ground, a teddy bear lying face down in a puddle of something dark. Marcus's Honda sat exactly where he'd left it yesterday, back when yesterday meant something, back when the biggest worry in his life was whether to get Chinese or pizza for dinner. He fumbled for his keys, his hands shaking so bad it took 3 tries to get the fob out of his pocket. The car beeped, lights flashing, and the sound echoed through the garage like a dinner bell. Marcus threw himself into the driver's seat, slammed the door, hit the lock button. The engine turned over on the first try, and he could have cried with relief. In his rearview mirror, shapes were emerging from the shadows, at least a dozen of them, moving toward the sound, toward the lights, toward him. Marcus threw the car in reverse, not bothering with his seatbelt, not bothering to check his mirrors properly. He just needed to move, needed to get out of this concrete tomb before it became his grave. The Honda's bumper clipped one of them, sending it spinning. Marcus cranked the wheel, shifted to drive, and pointed the car toward the exit ramp. More of them were coming up from the first level, blocking his path, and Marcus realized with crystal clarity that he had maybe one chance to get this right. He pressed the accelerator to the floor, aimed for the gap between 2 zombies, and prayed. The Honda's engine roared like it understood the stakes, and Marcus gripped the steering wheel hard enough to make his knuckles white as he shot through the gap between the 2 zombies. One of them, a guy in a torn business suit, bounced off the passenger side mirror, spider-webbing the glass but not breaking through. The other one Marcus missed by inches, close enough to see its milky eyes track his movement, close enough to see its jaw working uselessly as he blasted past. The exit ramp spat him out onto 15th Street, and Marcus had exactly 0 seconds to appreciate his escape before he had to slam on the brakes to avoid a pileup that stretched across 3 lanes. Cars sat at odd angles, some with their engines still running, some with doors hanging open like mouths frozen mid-scream. Bodies lay in the street, and Marcus couldn't tell which ones were really dead and which ones were the kind of dead that stood back up. He cranked the wheel right, jumped the curb, and drove his Honda across the sidewalk, his suspension screaming as he bounced over a fire hydrant and sideswiped a newspaper box. A zombie lurched out from behind a bus shelter and Marcus didn't brake, didn't swerve, just plowed through it with a thump that he felt in his teeth. The thing rolled over his hood, cracked his windshield with its skull, and tumbled off the back. Marcus kept driving. The route to the highway should have been simple: take 15th to Broadway, Broadway to I-70 West, then straight shot into the mountains. Should have been a 20-minute drive in morning traffic. But morning traffic didn't exist anymore, replaced by something that looked like the world's worst demolition derby mixed with scenes from every nightmare Marcus had never wanted to have. At the Broadway intersection, a delivery truck had jackknifed it across all lanes, its trailer doors hanging open, packages scattered everywhere like confetti at the world's worst party. People had tried to get around it. Marcus could see the tire marks, the abandoned attempts, the cars that hadn't made it. He shifted into reverse, nearly colliding with a Prius that had 3 zombies inside it, their faces pressed against the windows, hands slapping at the glass. The driver's side window was cracked, held together by nothing but tinting film, and Marcus could see it starting to give way. He found another route, cutting through a gas station parking lot where the pumps were still running, gasoline pooling on the ground from where someone had dropped the nozzle. A woman was there, alive, trying to fill up a motorcycle while looking over her shoulder every 2 seconds. She saw Marcus, made eye contact through his cracked windshield, and her expression asked the question. Marcus slowed, just for a second, his foot hovering between the gas and the brake. The woman's eyes went wide and she pointed behind his car, her mouth forming a word Marcus didn't need to hear to understand. He checked his rearview mirror and saw them, at least 20 zombies stumbling out from the convenience store, from the car wash, from everywhere and nowhere. The woman abandoned her motorcycle and ran, and Marcus made a choice he'd have to live with. He accelerated, leaving her behind, leaving everyone behind, because the new rules of the world were simple and brutal and didn't care about the person he used to be. I-70's on-ramp appeared like salvation, and Marcus took it doing 60, the Honda's tires squealing as he merged onto the highway. For about 30 seconds, he thought he'd made it, thought the road ahead would be clear and he could just drive, just point the car west and not stop until he hit Dylan's cabin. Then he crested the hill near the Morrison exit and saw the truth. The highway was a graveyard. Cars stretched for miles, packed bumper to bumper, and between them moved the dead. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, wandering through the stalled traffic like shoppers at the world's slowest mall. Some were clustered around cars where people had made the mistake of trying to wait it out. Others walked alone, heading in random directions, following sounds or smells or whatever broken compass guided them. Marcus's Honda rolled to a stop, the engine idling, while his brain tried to plot a route through the impossible. The shoulder was packed. The median was a concrete barrier. The only way through was through, weaving between vehicles, hoping none of them had zombies inside, hoping the gaps were wide enough, hoping his luck held for just a little longer. A face appeared in his driver's side window and Marcus nearly jumped out of his skin. Not a zombie, a kid, maybe 12 years old, his face streaked with tears and dirt. Behind him was a woman, probably his mom, holding a baseball bat that looked like it had seen recent use. The kid was saying something, mouthing words Marcus couldn't hear through the glass. Please. Help. Something like that. The woman was scanning the highway, the bat raised, ready. More zombies were turning their way, attracted by the kid's movement, the noise, the presence of living meat. Marcus looked at the kid, at the mom, at his empty back seat. Looked at the distance between his car and the nearest zombies. Looked at the long road ahead and the dwindling options behind. His hand moved to the door lock. The mechanism clicked. The kid grabbed the handle, and that's when Marcus saw the bite on the woman's arm, the dark blood soaking through her torn sleeve, the way she was favoring her left side. Their eyes met, Marcus and the mom, and hers held an apology, a desperate plea, a mother's final calculation. She shoved the kid away from the car, back toward the center of the highway, and swung her bat at Marcus's window. Not to break it, but to make him go, to make him leave, to save him from her mistake. Marcus understood. He slammed the gas pedal and the Honda lurched forward, threading between a minivan and a pickup truck. In his mirror, he saw the woman turn to face the approaching zombies, saw her raise the bat one last time, saw the kid standing there frozen until another survivor, a man in a flannel shirt, grabbed him and pulled him toward a cluster of other people making a stand near an overturned semi. Then Marcus was past them, navigating the maze of metal and corpses, his cracked windshield making everything look fractured and wrong. The mountains rose in the distance, purple and white against the morning sky, close enough to see but far enough to feel impossible. 6 hours to the cabin, Dylan had said. Marcus checked his gas gauge. 3/4 of a tank. Maybe enough. Maybe not. The Honda's front right tire hit something soft and Marcus didn't look down to see what it was. He just kept driving, kept moving, because stopping meant dying, and he wasn't ready to die. Not yet. Not when every breath was a fight and every mile was a victory and tomorrow was a place he might not reach but damn sure was going to try. 2 hours into what should have been a 6-hour drive, and Marcus had covered maybe 40 miles. The Honda's passenger side mirror was gone, ripped off when he'd squeezed between a school bus and a concrete barrier doing 45. His cracked windshield had sprouted 3 new fracture lines, souvenirs from a chunk of debris he'd hit somewhere past Golden. The gas gauge needle had dropped to just below half, and every drop of fuel felt like borrowed time measured in ounces. The highway had thinned out past the Georgetown exit, fewer cars blocking the road, fewer zombies wandering between them. Marcus wanted to feel relief, but his hands were locked on the steering wheel in a death grip that made his forearms burn, and his eyes hadn't stopped scanning for threats long enough to blink properly. Every overpass could hide an ambush. Every curve could reveal another pileup. Every abandoned car could have something inside it waiting to lunge. The radio had been cycling through static and emergency broadcasts on repeat, the same robotic voice telling him to seek shelter, avoid the infected, wait for military assistance that both of them knew wasn't coming. Marcus finally shut it off somewhere near Silver Plume, the silence in the car worse than the lies but at least more honest. His phone sat in the cup holder, dead now, the battery drained from searching for a signal that didn't exist anymore. His last text from Dylan was still on the screen, frozen there like a message from another dimension, getting Mom and heading to the cabin. That had been 4 hours ago. Marcus didn't let himself think about what might have happened in 4 hours. The mountain road narrowed as he climbed, pine trees pressing in on both sides, their shadows cutting across the asphalt like bars on a prison cell. The turnoff for Breckenridge appeared on a shot-up road sign, and Marcus took it, the Honda's engine whining as the grade increased. Up here, the world looked almost normal if you didn't look too hard. Trees swayed in the wind. A hawk circled overhead. The sky was blue the way it always was at altitude, like God hadn't gotten the memo that everything below was going straight to hell. Then Marcus rounded a bend and found the roadblock. 3 vehicles sat across both lanes, a county sheriff's SUV, a pickup truck, and a Subaru wagon that looked like it had tried to ram through and failed. Behind the makeshift barricade stood 5 people, and every single one of them was holding a gun. Marcus slammed on his brakes, the Honda fishtailing on the mountain road, his heart jumping into his throat. The people behind the barricade didn't lower their weapons. A man stepped forward, maybe 50 years old, with a hunting rifle pointed directly at Marcus's chest through the windshield. He was wearing a sheriff's deputy uniform, but his badge was gone and his face had the hard set of someone who'd already made too many impossible choices today. "Engine off," the deputy shouted. "Hands where I can see them." Marcus complied, his hands shaking as he raised them, pressing them against his cracked windshield. His chef's knife was gone, left buried in a zombie's skull back in Denver. He had nothing, was nothing, just a guy in a Honda hoping not to get shot by the people who were supposed to protect and serve. "I'm not infected," Marcus yelled through the glass. "I'm just trying to get to my brother's cabin up past Breckenridge. I'm not sick, I'm not bit, I just want to pass through." The deputy exchanged glances with the others, a young woman in camo holding a shotgun, an old guy with a pistol that looked like it belonged in a museum, 2 younger men who might have been brothers, both armed with what looked like AR-15s. They were having a conversation without words, the kind that people have when the decision they're making might mean life or death. "Get out of the car," the deputy finally said. "Slow. Keep your hands up." Marcus opened the door and stepped out onto the mountain road, the altitude and the fear making his head spin. The wind cut through his jacket, carrying the smell of pine and something else underneath it, something rotten that didn't belong up here in the clean air. "Turn around," the woman with the shotgun ordered. "Lift your shirt. Show us your arms, your neck." Marcus did as he was told, turning in a slow circle, raising his shirt to show his unmarked torso, extending his arms so they could see he hadn't been bitten. The inspection felt like it took an hour but probably lasted 30 seconds. "He's clean," one of the younger men said. "Clean don't mean safe," the old guy muttered. "Could be leading a whole herd of them up here. Could be a scout for raiders. Could be, he's alone, Wayne," the deputy cut him off. "And he's terrified. Look at him." The deputy lowered his rifle slightly, and Marcus felt like he could breathe again. "Where's your brother's cabin?" "About 15 miles up, near the old mining road turnoff. My brother Dylan DeWitt, he went to get our mom from Colorado Springs." "You haven't seen a blue Ford F-150 come through here, have you?" The expressions on their faces told Marcus everything before they said a word. "Nothing's come up from the Springs in 3 hours," the woman with the shotgun said softly. "Road's blocked down there." Heard on the radio before the stations went dark that the Springs got hit hard, real hard. If your brother went down there. She didn't finish. Didn't need to. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest, some last piece of hope that he'd been carrying without realizing it. Dylan was gone. Mom was gone. The cabin was just a place now, not salvation, not reunion, just four walls and a roof in the mountains where he'd be alone. You can't stay here, the deputy said, but his voice had gentleness in it now, the kind reserved for the recently bereaved. We're holding this position for folks from Breckenridge, family and friends. Got about 30 people holed up in the resort, trying to figure out next moves. You keep heading up, you'll be on your own. I know, Marcus said. Story of the day. He started back toward his Honda, then stopped. How bad is it? Really? The deputy looked at the others, then back at Marcus. Denver's gone. Springs is gone. Heard reports that every major city is the same, New York, LA, Chicago, all of them. This thing, whatever it is, it moves fast and it don't stop. The dead are walking, son, and the living are running out of places to hide. Marcus nodded like this information was something his brain could process, like the end of civilization was just another fact to file away. The resort in Breckenridge, he said. They taking people? If you're not infected and you can pull your weight, the woman said. But I'll be straight with you, supplies are thin and getting thinner. Might be safer on your own, you got somewhere to go. Marcus climbed back into his Honda, his legs weak, his mind racing through calculations he didn't want to make. The cabin had supplies, Dylan had made sure of that. Food, water, weapons, everything two brothers might need for a hunting trip or the end of the world, whichever came first. But it also had emptiness, isolation, the kind of alone that could break a person faster than any zombie. The barricade pulled aside just enough to let him through. As Marcus drove past, the deputy leaned down to his window. That cabin of yours, it defendable? Yeah, Marcus said. My dad built it that way. Paranoid old bastard thought the government was coming for his guns. Guess he was worried about the wrong thing. Maybe not, the deputy said. You get up there, you lock it down tight, you might just make it. And if you don't? He pulled something from his belt, a small radio. Channel 7. We check in every 6 hours. Someone's still alive out there, worth knowing you ain't the last one. Marcus took the radio, clutched it like a lifeline. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You ain't survived till you survive. Now get going before dark. Things get worse when the sun goes down. The Honda's headlights cut through the growing darkness like weak flashlights in a cave, illuminating 10 feet of dirt road at a time and nothing beyond. Marcus had missed the turnoff to the cabin twice before finally spotting the 3 stacked rocks Dylan always used as a marker, half hidden under fresh pine needles and the debris of a world falling apart. The road up to the cabin was barely a road at all, more like a suggestion carved into the mountainside by their father 20 years ago when he decided that civilization was a disease and isolation was the cure. Turned out the old man had been half right, just wrong about which disease to worry about. The Honda bottomed out twice on the rutted path, scraping metal on rock, and Marcus winced at each impact but kept going. No choice now. He was 3 miles off the main road, committed to this direction, and turning around in the dark on a mountain path wide enough for one vehicle was a death sentence waiting to happen. Tree branches scraped along both sides of the car like skeletal fingers, and every shadow between the pines could have been a zombie or a bear or just his imagination working overtime. The cabin appeared in his headlights like something from a memory, almost too familiar to be real. Single story, wood-sided, with a metal roof that their dad had installed himself after the original shingles blew off in a windstorm. The windows were dark, shuttered from the inside the way Dylan always left them during the off-season. The front porch sagged slightly on the left side, same as it had for the past 5 years. No blue Ford F-150 in sight. Marcus killed the engine and sat in the sudden silence, his hands still gripping the wheel, his body refusing to accept that he'd made it, that the drive was over, that he was here. The deputy's radio crackled in the passenger seat, someone's voice cutting through static. Checkpoint 4 to base. We got movement on the south approach, at least 20 of them, request instructions. Then static again, then nothing. Marcus grabbed his backpack from the back seat, the radio, and the tire iron he'd found in his trunk somewhere around the Georgetown exit. The chef's knife was long gone, and the tire iron was a poor substitute, but it was heavy and metal and better than his bare hands. The mountain air hit him when he opened the door, cold and thin and so clean it almost hurt to breathe after hours of recycled car air and fierce sweat. Stars filled the sky in numbers that Denver never saw, indifferent and eternal and completely unconcerned with the fact that humanity was eating itself alive down below. Marcus crossed the 10 feet from his car to the cabin porch in about 3 seconds, his eyes scanning the tree line, his ears straining for the sound of footsteps that shouldn't be there. The front door was locked, deadbolt engaged, exactly how Dylan would have left it. Marcus fumbled for the key they kept hidden under the third porch board from the left, his fingers finding the small magnetic box by memory more than sight. The key turned smoothly, the door swung open, and Marcus slipped inside, slamming it shut behind him and throwing the deadbolt home with a click that sounded like the most beautiful thing he'd ever heard. Darkness inside the cabin was total. No power up here, the cabin ran on a generator that Dylan must have shut down the last time he visited. Marcus stood with his back against the door, his breath coming fast, waiting for his eyes to adjust, waiting for something to lunge at him out of the black. Nothing lunged. Slowly, shapes emerged from the darkness, the outline of the old couch, the wood stove in the corner, the gun cabinet against the far wall. Marcus felt his way across the room, his hands outstretched, his feet remembering the layout even if his eyes couldn't confirm it. The gun cabinet was locked, but the key was in his pocket, the same keyring as the front door. His fingers shook as he worked the lock, and when it clicked open, he could have cried with relief. The Remington 870 shotgun sat in its rack, right where it always was. Dylan's deer rifle next to it. Their dad's old .45 pistol in the drawer below, along with boxes of ammunition that suddenly meant the difference between surviving and becoming a meal. Marcus loaded the shotgun with hands that were steadier now, muscle memory from hunting trips taking over. 5 shells, 1 in the chamber, safety on. The weight of it in his hands made the world feel slightly less insane, slightly more manageable. He found the flashlight in the kitchen drawer, tested it, being strong and steady, and finally allowed himself to look around the cabin properly. Everything was exactly as it should be. Canned goods in the pantry. Water jugs under the sink. The propane tanks outside would still be full, Dylan had refilled them in September. The generator had fuel. The cabin could support 1 person for months, 2 people for weeks. It was built for this, built by a paranoid old man who'd prepared for the wrong apocalypse but had accidentally gotten ready for the right one. Marcus checked every room, every closet, every space large enough to hide a zombie. All clear. He wedged chairs under the door handles, checked that all the window shutters were secure from the inside, and finally, let himself collapse onto the couch. The deputy's radio crackled again. Base to all units, fall back to secondary positions. Primary checkpoint is overrun. Repeat, primary is overrun. All personnel fall back to the resort. We're sealing the static. Silence. Marcus stared at the radio, waiting for more, but the airwaves had gone dead. He thought about the deputy, about the woman with the shotgun, about the 30 people holed up in the Breckenridge Resort trying to hold back the tide. He thought about Dylan and his mom, somewhere between Colorado Springs and here, probably not thinking about anything anymore. The exhaustion hit him all at once, 18 hours of adrenaline and terror crashing down like a wave. His eyes burned. His body ached. His mind kept replaying the day on loop, Mrs. Patterson running, Jerry's dead eyes in the stairwell, the woman at the gas station, the kid on the highway with the bitten mother. Every choice he'd made, every person he'd left behind. Marcus stood up, crossed to the window, and carefully opened one shutter just enough to look out at the night. The forest was dark and still. No movement. No moans. No indication that the dead had followed him up the mountain. For the first time since the coffee maker had died that morning, Marcus felt something like safety. It wouldn't last. He knew that. The cabin was isolated but not invisible. The dead would wander, would spread, would eventually find their way up here. Raiders might come looking for supplies. Winter would arrive in a few months, and the cold didn't care if you were prepared or not. But tonight, right now, in this moment, Marcus DeWitt was alive. He had walls, had weapons, had supplies. He had a radio that might connect him to other survivors. He had a chance. Outside, something moved in the trees. Marcus tensed, raising the shotgun, his finger finding the safety. A deer stepped into the small clearing in front of the cabin, its head raised, ears swiveling. It stood there for a moment, unbothered and unaware, then bounded back into the forest with 3 graceful leaps. Marcus lowered the gun, released a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. The world was ending, but it hadn't ended yet. The night was dangerous, but he'd survived the day. Tomorrow would bring new horrors, new challenges, new impossible choices. But tomorrow wasn't here yet. Marcus closed the shutter, locked it down, and allowed himself to believe, just for tonight, that he might actually see tomorrow come. Marcus woke to silence, and that was what scared him most. No birds. No wind through the pines. No distant sounds of civilization humming along like background noise he'd never noticed until it disappeared. Just silence, thick and suffocating, like the world was holding its breath. He'd fallen asleep sitting up on the couch, the shotgun across his lap, his body's exhaustion finally overriding his mind's refusal to let go. Gray morning light filtered through the cracks in the shutters, and for maybe 3 seconds, Marcus thought yesterday had been a nightmare, just his brain processing too much late-night news and zombie movies. Then he saw the tire iron on the floor, saw the dirt and blood on his jeans, saw the deputy's radio on the coffee table, and remembered that nightmares didn't leave evidence. He stood up, his back screaming protest from the awkward sleeping position, and moved to the window. Carefully, quietly, he cracked open the shutter and looked out at his first morning in the new world. The forest looked exactly the same as it always had. Pine trees stretching up the mountainside. The dirt clearing in front of the cabin with his Honda sitting there like a monument to yesterday's escape. The sky was that particular shade of blue that only existed at altitude, and snow was visible on the peaks above, indifferent and eternal. Marcus spent 10 minutes checking every window, every sight line, looking for any indication that the dead had found their way up here during the night. Nothing. No movement. No bodies stumbling through the trees. The isolation that used to make this place feel lonely now made it feel like a fortress. The radio crackled to life, making Marcus jump hard enough to nearly drop the shotgun. Base to any units still operational, this is Sheriff Dawson. If you can hear this, respond on Channel 7. Repeat, any survivors on Channel 7, respond. The deputy's voice from yesterday. Marcus grabbed the radio, his thumb hovering over the transmit button. Every instinct screamed at him to respond, to make contact, to confirm that he wasn't alone in the universe. But another part of his brain, the part that had kept him alive through yesterday, whispered that radio signals traveled far, that sound attracted attention, that silence was survival. He waited. Other voices crackled through, Unit 3 responding, we're at the resort, we've got maybe 45 people here, but we're running low on medical supplies and ammunition. This is Jake Thornton, I'm holed up in the hardware store on Main Street with my family. We can see them outside, must be 100 of them. Can't get out. Need help. Checkpoint 4 is gone. Everyone's gone. I'm the only, static. Fire spreading from the west side of town. The propane depot caught, and it's static. Marcus listened to the voices, to the desperate roll call of the dying and the barely surviving, and he made a decision. He pressed the transmit button. This is Marcus DeWitt. I'm in a cabin about 15 miles from Breckenridge, off the old mining road. I'm alone, I've got supplies, I've got weapons. Is there a plan? Is anyone coordinating? The silence that followed felt like judgment. Then the deputy's voice came back, Marcus, this is Sheriff Dawson. Glad you made it. There's no plan, son. No coordination. Government's gone, military's gone, or if they ain't gone, they've got their own problems. We're just trying to make it through each day. You got supplies in defensible position, you might want to stay put. What about the resort? Marcus asked. You said 45 people. That's enough to defend, enough to rebuild. A different voice came through, the woman with the shotgun from yesterday. This is Rachel Kemp. The resort's got numbers, but we're burning through supplies fast. Too many people, not enough food. And they keep coming. The dead, I mean. More every day, like they're following something up from the valleys. We're planning to move higher into the mountains in the next 72 hours, try to find somewhere more remote. Marcus looked around his cabin, at the supplies stacked in the pantry, at the propane tanks outside that could power the generator for months. He thought about 45 people, about safety in numbers, about the possibility of rebuilding something resembling civilization. Then he thought about 45 mouths to feed, 45 people making noise, 45 different agendas and arguments and breakdowns waiting to happen. I've got room for maybe 2, 3 people up here if anyone needs a place, Marcus heard himself say. Can't support more than that, but if there's injured, or if someone needs to lay low. Noted, Sheriff Dawson said. We've got a map marking survivor locations. You're officially on it. We'll check in daily at 0800 hours, share information, coordinate if we can. Beyond that, you're on your own. We all are. The radio traffic continued for another 20 minutes, reports of zombie movements, requests for medical supplies that nobody had, debates about whether to stay or run further into the wilderness. Marcus listened to it all while he worked, while he did an inventory of the cabin's supplies, while he checked the generator and confirmed it fired up on the third pull. The pantry held enough canned goods for 6 months if he rationed. The water situation was good, there was a stream 100 yards into the forest that fed from snowmelt, clean and cold. The propane would last through winter if he was careful. Ammunition was the concern, 3 boxes of shotgun shells, 2 boxes for the rifle, 1 box for the .45. Enough for hunting, enough for defense against maybe a dozen zombies if they came one at a time, but not enough for a prolonged siege. Marcus would have to make every shot count, would have to be smart about when to fight and when to hide. He spent the rest of the morning reinforcing the cabin's defenses. Dylan had stacked firewood along one wall of the porch, and Marcus repositioned it to create a makeshift barrier. He checked the roof for weak points, confirmed all the shutters were solid, moved supplies away from windows in case he had to shoot from inside. By noon, he'd transformed the cabin from a hunting retreat into something that could actually be defended. The radio crackled periodically with updates. A group of survivors had made it to an abandoned ski lift station. Someone reported seeing military helicopters heading north. The fire in Breckenridge had burned out, but it had taken 3 buildings with it. The dead kept coming. Marcus made himself eat, a can of beans heated on the propane stove, the first meal he'd had since yesterday's breakfast. It tasted like metal and survival, and he forced down every bite because his body needed fuel even if his stomach was twisted in knots. In the afternoon, he took the rifle and scouted the perimeter around the cabin, moving quiet through the trees the way his father had taught him. No sign of zombies, but he found fresh deer tracks, found where a bear had marked territory on a pine tree, found the world continuing on despite humanity's collapse. On his way back to the cabin, Marcus stopped at the small clearing where his father's grave sat, marked by a simple wooden cross Dylan had carved 3 years ago. "You were right, old man," Marcus said to the grave, to the cross, to the ghost of a paranoid survivalist who'd prepared for this without knowing what this would be. "You were right about all of it. Wish you were wrong." The sun was setting when Marcus made it back to the cabin, painting the sky in oranges and purples that belonged in a world that still had time for beauty. He locked himself inside, wedged the furniture back against the doors, and settled in with the shotgun and the radio. At 8 p.m., Sheriff Dawson did a roll call of known survivors. 43 people responded from various locations scattered across the mountains. 43 voices in the darkness, 43 people still fighting, still breathing, still refusing to give up. Marcus added his voice to the count, and for a moment, he felt connected to something larger than his own survival. "Same time tomorrow," Sheriff Dawson said. "We keep checking in, we keep counting, we keep reminding ourselves that we're still human, still here. The dead can have the cities, but they don't get the mountains. They don't get us. Stay strong, stay smart, and stay alive." The radio went quiet. Marcus sat in the darkness of the cabin, the shotgun across his lap, listening to the silence that wasn't quite silence anymore. Outside, the forest breathed and shifted. The world kept turning. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new challenges, new reasons to be afraid. But Marcus DeWitt had made it through the day. He'd survived the impossible, had found shelter, had connected with other survivors. He had food, water, weapons, and walls. He had a radio that linked him to 42 other people who refused to quit. The struggle for tomorrow wasn't over. It had barely begun. Every breath was still a fight to stay alive, every moment a choice between giving up and pushing forward. But as the stars came out over the mountain and the night settled in around his father's cabin, Marcus made himself a promise. He would keep fighting. Keep surviving. Keep checking in on Channel 7 at 0800 hours. Keep counting himself among the living. Because humanity hadn't ended when the dead started walking. It had just gotten harder, meaner, and more desperate. And if Marcus had learned anything in the past 36 hours, it was that he was more desperate to live than he'd ever imagined. The apocalypse had come for the world, but it hadn't come for him. Not yet. Not today. And if he had anything to say about it, not tomorrow either. Outside his shuttered windows, the mountains stood guard. Inside, a survivor prepared for another dawn. The human struggle for tomorrow continued, one breath at a time.